The first thing I did was ask Copilot to create a Node.js function called addSticky that uses the Mural API to add a sticky note to a mural. And the function that it generated is a pretty good start. In the success case, I want the sticky note ID that's returned from the Mural API call to be printed. That looks pretty good. Now, there is a problem here. It's a little thing, but workspace ID is included. But I know from using the Mural API that workspace ID is not needed in this case. I don't have to go look up an ID of something if I don't need it. So I asked a question, is the workspace ID mandatory? And so the answer is no, it's not. As an aside, do you see here where the model is doubling down on its answer and says, yeah, according to the Mural reference information, I've got it right. This link here, it's not valid. It's a hallucination. Unfortunately, Copilot classified my input as a question and didn't make any changes, so I had to prompt. Why is workspace ID included in the header? But that's still a question again. I got to type my prompt again. Remove workspace ID from the implementation. Okay, so now it did that. Workspace ID is gone. Next, I want the API token to be pulled out of the body of that function. That's nice. Okay, and we got to make sure that this new function is actually being called. So make that change, and at the bottom, we actually add a sticky note. Now, because I've used this Mural API before, I can see there are some problems here. So I say, are you certain the URL is correct? So that's me again. Instead of giving a prompt, I'm asking a question. That's what I would say to a human developer. Copilot answers, the URL you are using is not correct. It even says, according to the official Mural API documentation, and it links there, but again, that link's not valid. And also, it's kind of annoying that it says the URL you are using. I feel like, hey man, it's not my URL that I'm using. This is code you generated. Don't blame me. Anyway, so it gave a little answer and didn't make any updates, and it was a little bit user blamey. And also, the correct, so-called correct URL is still not right. Now we go back to that fetch functionality. So I say the URL is not correct. Use the API documentation for reference to correct it. And then I do the fetch call to pull in the API docs for the endpoint that I want to use. Do you notice this little bug here? I told it to fetch a specific URL, and it says it fetched a different URL. So it does all that, and it hasn't fixed it, changed the URL, but the endpoint is also still wrong. So let's go back here. So I give it the gears a little bit. The endpoint of the URL is not correct. Read the API reference to correct the endpoint. Fetch, and then the same topic. And now you can see that is actually the correct endpoint. We make progress. Okay, so let's look at the next problem here. I know from having used the Mural API before that this data payload isn't right. So I say the data payload isn't valid. Refer to the API reference to include only the required fields. And then it says the required fields are X, Y, and text. So it made that change. So it just has X, Y, and text. That's still not right. So I gave it the gears again. Are you certain text is a required field? And then I, again, did fetch so it could look up the answer. But it was insisted that yes, as a required text is a required field. So it is either not fetching like a bug, or like before, it's really having trouble extracting the necessary information from the Mural API reference. So it's still wrong. Text is actually not a required field, so our little chat was wrong. But I do want to use the text field, so I'm just going to leave that alone. But I'm going to move on to another one now because the shape field is actually required and it's not there. So is the shape field required? Copilot says, no, it's not. So I say, you're incorrect. The shape field is required. And again, use the fetch. So it corrected it. Added the shape field. I don't know if it added it because of the fetch or because I told it that it was incorrect, but okay, it added the shape field. Unfortunately, square is not a valid value for the shape field. So we keep going. What are the two supported values for the shape field? And then tried to use fetch again. And said the two supported values are square and circle. That's not right. Square is not a supported value. No, square is not a supported value for the shape field. Read the API reference again. What are the two supported values for this shape field? So it tries again, and it gives an answer that the two supported values are rectangle and ellipse. Still not right. The two supported values are rectangle and circle. So I don't know where this is coming from, but it's not having a good day. Anyway, so I correct it. I say the supported values of the shape field are circle and rectangle. So then it updates the code and sets the shape to rectangle. I mean, at this point, I could have just done this myself, right? Copilot's not helping me. So the next problem that I want to fix here is there's a print statement that's printing the whole data that's returned in the response. I don't want that. I want just the ID. So I prompt saying I want just the ID. And now it gets rid of these other print statements and it just prints response.data.id. I know from having used the REST API before that that is not what gets returned. This is the same problem we had from the read widgets experiment. So I say ID is not a field in the response.data, look up the format in the API reference, and then correct the implementation. So when it does that, it changes it into data.widgets as an array, and then it gets the first one, and that's not right. So just like before, we can look in the documentation for a sample. And then just like I did with the read widgets example, I just said, there is no widgets field in responsive data. Update the code to print the new sticky note ID, which is returned in the response. Here's the sample response. Copilot made the appropriate change given the prompt that I just told it. The prompt that I just told it said data.value, and that value is an array. You get the first one, and then you get .id. Unfortunately, when you run this script, you get an error because the information in the MURAL API reference, that sample response, is wrong. There's no array. It should just be response.data.value.id. So this was tough. I think the fetch feature is really important and is going to be really useful. But unfortunately for us in this case, the MURAL API reference information hasn't been published in a way that makes it easy to pull out the necessary reference information that's needed by this AI integrated coding use case, and by the way, needed by AI agents who are doing function calling.